The courtroom camera recorded what would become the most widely shared Judge Judy clip in the show's history. A woman sat in the plaintiff's chair, speaking in a British accent she clearly believed was perfect, delivering her story with a level of forced refinement that would make actual, rich people cringe. She introduced herself as Victoria Ashford Williams, unaware that Judge Judy was about to expose her as one of the most fraudulent, pathetic con artists ever to appear on national television. What began as a grand performance of fake, aristocratic poise would end with her breaking down in her real voice, a harsh Midwestern American accent that instantly destroyed the persona she had worked so hard to create. But that wasn't the most shocking part. Victoria didn't just lose her case. She wasn't merely embarrassed by her terrible accent. Judge Judy dismantled her entire facade with such precision and intensity that it revealed a pattern of fraud stretching across 15 years and multiple states. Victoria had walked into the courtroom convinced her British identity would intimidate a working-class defendant and charm one of America's toughest judges. She never expected that Judge Judy had already identified her true name, her criminal record, and every lie she had woven into her life. Imagine her entrance. A woman calling herself Victoria Ashford Williams, gliding into Judge Judy's courtroom as if she were attending a royal event. Her blonde hair was styled in an elaborate updo that practically shouted desperation. Her outfit was meant to signal Old Money Prestige tweed blazer with elbow patches, a silk scarf tied in a meticulous knot, and pearl earrings that were actually cheap costume pieces. She carried a leather portfolio stamped with what appeared to be a family crest, likely purchased online for little money. Her confidence was overwhelming. She had rehearsed her accent endlessly, practiced her statements like an amateur actress preparing for a period drama audition, and perfected every gesture meant to convey class and superiority. She looked at the defendant, working mother, with the kind of disdain that comes from someone convinced she is above everyone else. Victoria was suing her neighbor, Jennifer Lawrence, for $3,500. Claiming Jennifer's children had run through her home with muddy shoes and ruined a Persian rug she described as priceless and inherited from her family's estate in the Cotswolds. She presented photos, documents, and what she insisted were authentication papers proving the rug's value and origin. She had been planning this lawsuit ever since Jennifer questioned her background during a neighborhood association meeting. One simple question: where exactly in England she was from, and why her accent shifted depending on who she spoke to, had turned Jennifer into her personal target. Victoria had convinced herself she needed to teach this common American woman a lesson about respecting her superiors, and she had built an entire legal case solely to accomplish that. What the audience couldn't see, and what Victoria herself never imagined, was that Judge Judy had recognized the fraud almost immediately upon reviewing the case file. The exaggerated British name, the too perfect victim narrative, the conveniently inherited heirloom, the theatrical paperwork, none of it fooled her. Judge Judy had encountered every variety of scammer, liar, and con artist who had ever attempted to manipulate her courtroom. But Victoria stood out. She was about to become the perfect example of what happens when an elaborate fake persona collides with a judge who has access to background investigators and zero tolerance for fabricated identities or phony accents on the surface. The case looked simple, a dispute between neighbors over a damaged rug. But Judge Judy's trained eye had noticed numerous red flags in Victoria's initial submissions. The British spellings were inconsistent, sometimes using honor and color, and other times switching to American spelling. The alleged family estate in the Cotswolds was never named, only vaguely referenced. The authentication certificate for the Persian rug was clearly produced on a home computer, complete with clip heart borders. And most revealing of all, a quick background check showed that Victoria Ashford Williams appeared nowhere in British records. immigration databases, or property registries. However, someone named Vicki Williams from Toledo, Ohio, for small-time fraud and multiple aliases matched her description precisely. Judge Judy had followed up. She contacted British immigration, antique verification experts, and law enforcement agencies in several states. By the time Victoria entered the courtroom, adjusting her costume pearls and preparing her fake accent, Judge Judy had assembled a complete profile of who she truly was, what she had done, and exactly how she intended to dismantle her public facade. Victoria believed her. British persona would give her an edge: credibility, sophistication, and superiority over her ordinary neighbor. Instead, it was about to become one of the most humiliating exposures of fraud ever shown on courtroom television. The woman who imagined she sounded like aristocracy was about to be revealed as nothing more than a small-time con artist from Ohio who had watched too many episodes of Downton Abbey and convinced herself she could deceive a judge who had been dismantling frauds long before Victoria created her. Persona Jennifer Lawrence, the defendant, sat trembling in her chair, holding a folder of receipts, photos, and documents proving her children had never even entered Victoria's home on the day in question. For months, she had lived in fear of this woman, who had inserted herself into their quiet suburban neighborhood like an infection, spreading her fake British persona and wielding it like a weapon against anyone who dared question her. Authority Jennifer had spent $2,000 on lawyer consultations, money her family desperately needed, trying to defend herself against a lawsuit she knew was entirely fabricated. She lost sleep, suffered anxiety attacks, and could only watch as her children asked why the mean lady with the funny voice kept sending frightening letters to their home. What made it even worse was that most of the neighbors believed Victoria. They assumed that someone with such a polished British accent and refined manner must be telling the truth. To them, a person who carried herself with that much class had no reason to lie about something so trivial. What Jennifer didn't realize was that she was on the verge of being vindicated in the most dramatic way imaginable. Victoria had targeted the wrong neighbor and chosen the absolute worst courtroom in which to stage her performance. Judge Judy had built an entire career both on and off television, rooted in decades as a New York family court judge, dealing with thousands of cases involving fraud, manipulation, and people who thought appearance or affectation could replace facts. She had developed an almost uncanny ability to spot dishonesty the moment it entered her courtroom, and Victoria Ashford Williams set off every one of those internal alarms. The entitled posture, the overly theatrical way of speaking, the contemptuous looks directed at Jennifer, the grand but unverifiable backstory, everything pointed to someone hiding a far more troubling history. Victoria's real name was Vicki Williams. Born and raised in Toledo, Ohio, with no international background whatsoever except for a single cruise to Mexico at 19. She had dropped out of high school, drifted through low-paying jobs, and eventually discovered that creating elaborate false identities paid more than honest labor. Her fake British persona was actually her fourth major impersonation scheme. In Arizona, she used a French accent and claimed noble European ancestry, scamming elderly residents with fraudulent investment offers. In Florida, she adopted an exaggerated Southern belle persona, complete with invented plantation family lineage, to run a charity scam targeting church communities. In Nevada, she pretended to be a Hollywood talent scout, using a California Valley girl accent to lure aspiring actors into paying for photo packages that never existed. Each time, she relocated before authorities could finalize a case, leaving behind frustrated victims and unresolved warrants she assumed were too scattered to follow her. Her current aristocratic, British identity had been her most successful invention yet. She moved into an upscale suburban neighborhood, immediately adopting the Ashford Williams name and the accent she had stitched together from British period dramas and online videos of the royal family. She frequently name-dropped Oxford University, summers in the countryside, family estates, and aristocratic connections, delivering these claims with such unwavering confidence that the neighbors accepted them without question. Few could imagine that anyone would go to such extremes to fabricate an entire identity in a short span. She positioned herself as the neighborhood's unofficial authority on social standards. She hosted tea gatherings where she critiqued people's manners and education, offered unsolicited etiquette advice, and gradually crafted a reputation as someone cultured and refined. She managed to scam 2 neighbors with phony British real estate investment opportunities, convinced another to pay her $5,000 for introductions to her alleged contacts in London's art scene, and was developing several other long-running schemes. Everything changed when Jennifer Lawrence made what Victoria considered an unforgivable mistake. During a neighborhood association meeting, Jennifer politely asked which part of England Victoria was from, noting that her accent shifted between different regional styles depending on the conversation. It was a harmless question from someone who had actually been to England and recognized that Victoria's speech was an odd mixture of British dialects combining posh London pronunciation with northern inflections and occasionally tossing in Cockney slang in completely inappropriate ways. The question lingered in the room like a silent explosion. Victoria's face tightened with anger before she forced a laugh and gave a vague explanation about moving around frequently as a child. But the damage was irreversible. Someone had challenged her authenticity, and Victoria learned long ago that her best method for avoiding exposure was to attack. Anyone who threatened her, she decided to destroy. Jennifer's credibility by fabricating a lawsuit designed to look airtight complete, with forged certificates and theatrical testimony so the neighborhood would rally behind her, and Jennifer would be branded as someone motivated by jealousy toward refined people. Victoria prepared her case with meticulous detail. She bought a cheap Persian-style rug from HomeGoods for $200 and then invented an elaborate lineage for it, complete with forged authentication documents she designed on her home computer using clip art and decorative fonts. She enlisted a friend at a print shop to create professional-looking papers, claiming the rug was a 16th-century family heirloom worth $15,000. She staged photos of the rug with supposed mud damage, though any knowledgeable examiner would immediately see the marks were made with craft store fabric paint rather than actual dirt. She had spent countless hours rehearsing her testimony, refining her fabricated British accent, practicing her aristocratic mannerisms, and shaping a narrative that depicted Jennifer's children as destructive little terrors while presenting herself as the cultured victim of American unruliness. She even created a fake email exchange, supposedly showing that she had repeatedly asked Jennifer to control her children's messages, sent entirely from email accounts she had created herself. Judge Judy saw all of this in the submitted paperwork and recognized it instantly for what it was. Everything was too polished, too carefully arranged, too clearly assembled by someone who believed that quantity and presentation could compensate for authenticity. What ultimately sealed Victoria's fate was Judge Judy's choice to verify the claims, instead of accepting them at face value. A call to British immigration confirmed that no person named Victoria Ashford Williams had ever entered or exited the United Kingdom. A call to Oxford University confirmed that no one by that name had ever enrolled or been affiliated with the institution. Rug authentication experts identified the documents as obvious forgeries, constructed with incorrect terminology and formatting no credible appraiser would use. Law enforcement databases revealed that Vicki Williams of Toledo, Ohio, had outstanding warrants in 2 states and a long history of identity fraud. The courtroom doors opened. and Victoria Ashford Williams entered as though she were making an appearance at a royal ceremony. She swept inside with her leather portfolio held tightly against her chest, her posture unnaturally stiff, her chin raised in a way that suggested perpetual superiority. The cameras recorded every moment as she settled at the plaintiff's table, smoothing her tweed blazer and adjusting her silk scarf with carefully practiced, delicate motions meant to project refined heritage. Judge Judy observed this performance with the calm, steady expression of someone who already knew exactly how the situation would unfold. Over the years, she had watched countless individuals attempt to manufacture credibility through costumes, accents, and invented personas. Yet Victoria operated at a level of self-delusion that was almost remarkable in its intensity. Judge Judy opened the proceedings with her familiar, direct tone, her voice slicing through the tension with precise clarity. "Ms. Ashford Williams, you're suing Ms. Lawrence for $3,500, claiming her children damaged your Persian rug. Tell me what happened." 'Twas a simple prompt, the kind Judge Judy issued repeatedly each day. But Victoria's answer signaled immediately that this case would be unlike the others. She didn't merely respond. She launched into a full theatrical performance, the kind that would make even seasoned stage directors cringe with second-hand discomfort. "Your Honor, this situation is simply appalling and reflects everything wrong with how children are raised in modern America." Her accent was thick and over-enunciated, every syllable delivered with an exaggerated British affectation that sounded instantly false to anyone familiar with real British speech. On the 23rd of March, I invited several neighbors for afternoon tea, as one does. When Miss Lawrence's children came barreling through my home with absolutely no regard for proper decorum or respect for another person's property, Judge Judy's eyebrows lifted just slightly and early, almost imperceptible signal that experienced viewers recognized as the point where trouble began for whoever was speaking. The courtroom audience shifted, some leaning forward, others sharing skeptical looks at the theatrical accent. Victoria pressed on, her confidence increasing with every sentence. "These children, Your Honor, had been playing in the garden, and rather than removing their muddy Wellington boots as any properly raised child would, they tracked enormous amounts of mud directly across my 16th century Persian silk rug, which has been in my family since our estate in the Cotswolds was established." She paused, lifting a handkerchief to her eyes with dramatic delicacy, as though overwhelmed by emotion. "This rug has survived wars. It has survived generations. And it was ruined in mere moments through the negligence of a mother who refuses to teach her children even the most basic civilized behavior." Judge Judy allowed her to continue, withholding any follow-up questions and observing silently while Victoria sank deeper into her self-created narrative with every affected gesture and artificial pronunciation. Victoria then retrieved documents from her leather portfolio with theatrical flair, presenting them to the bailiff as though she were handing over royal treasures. "I have here the authentication certificates establishing the rug's provenance and value, documentation of the damage, and correspondence showing my repeated attempts to resolve this issue with Miss Lawrence before I was forced to take legal action." Her accent grew even more exaggerated as she settled deeper into her performance, sprinkling in British expressions that no actual British person would ever use in casual conversation. "Quite frankly, Your Honor, I find it rather distressing that one must resort to litigation simply to receive basic respect and accountability from one's neighbors. In England, such matters would be handled with far more grace and consideration." The instant those words were spoken, Judge Judy's expression shifted. The patient observer was gun-replaced by someone paying very close attention. "So, you're from England originally, Ms. Ashford Williams." The question sounded offhand, almost incidental, but there was a sharpness beneath it that slipped right past Victoria. "Oh yes, Your Honor. Born and bred, as they say. I spent my formative years in the Cotswolds before attending Oxford. And I've maintained strong ties to my homeland, even after relocating to America. Judge Judy nodded slowly, writing something on the papers before her. And what part of the Cotswolds specifically? Victoria paused just a fraction to long a hesitation so brief most people would have missed it. Judge Judy did not. The western region, Your Honor, near Cheltenham. Lovely countryside. Absolutely breathtaking. My family's estate has been there for centuries. Another deliberate note from Judge Judy's pen. And you attended Oxford University. What did you study? Victoria's confidence held. But the slightest tension appeared in her posture. Subtle physical signal that she was beginning to sense these were not casual questions. I read English literature, Your Honor, with a focus on Victorian-era novels and poetry. It was a transformative experience, being surrounded by such history and academic excellence. Judge Judy looked up, her gaze locking onto Victoria with an intensity that made several audience members gasp. That's fascinating. And how long have you been in the United States? Victoria shifted her weight just slightly, another tiny sign Judge Judy registered immediately. Approximately 5 years. Your Honor, though I return to England frequently to visit family and tend to my properties. Judge Judy nodded once more, slow, deliberate, and full of meaning. Regular viewers knew exactly what that gesture foretold. Someone was about to face a very unpleasant reckoning. Before allowing Victoria to continue her version of events, Judge Judy turned her attention to the defendant. Miss Ashford Williams will return to your testimony about the rug. I'd like to hear from Miss Lawrence. Jennifer sat stiffly in her chair, holding herself together, despite the anxiety tightening her throat. Judge Judy addressed her calmly. Miss Lawrence, tell me your version of what happened on March 23rd. Jennifer's voice trembled, though she spoke clearly. Her natural Midwestern accent contrasting sharply with Victoria's theatrical British performance. Your Honor, my children were never in her house on that day or on any other day. We've lived next door to her for months, and she's never invited us inside or interacted with us except to complain. On March 23rd, my kids were at school until the afternoon. Then they were at soccer practice, and afterward, they were home with me for the rest of the evening. I have time-stamped photos, the soccer sign-in sheets, and security camera footage from our home, showing they never left our property. Judge Judy reviewed the documents Jennifer handed over. Her face remained neutral, but her eyes moved quickly, absorbing every detail. These are very thorough records, Miss Lawrence. Why do you believe Miss Ashford Williams would claim your children damaged her rug if they were never inside her home? Jennifer inhaled deeply and glanced at Victoria, who glared back at her with open disdain. Your Honor, I believe she's retaliating because I asked her some questions at a neighborhood meeting about her background. She said she was from England, but her accent changes depending on the conversation. And some of her stories don't make sense. After I asked those questions, she started complaining about my family, and now this lawsuit. Victoria responded with an exaggerated sigh, the type meant to signal superiority. Your Honor, if I may, this is exactly the kind of defensive reaction expected from someone caught in negligence. Instead of taking responsibility, Miss Lawrence is inventing a conspiracy theory, suggesting I fabricated an entire case out of spite. It's utterly ridiculous. Judge Judy leaned back, a subtle smile forming at the edges of her mouth, a unmistakable sign that something devastating was about to happen. Miss Ashford Williams, she began slowly. I must say, your accent is quite something. Very distinctive. Victoria brightened, mistaking the remark for praise. Thank you, Your Honor. I've worked quite hard to maintain proper diction, despite being surrounded by American English. Judge Judy's smile widened by a hair. I can tell. In fact, I'd say you've worked very hard on that accent. Wouldn't you agree? There was a tone in her voice that finally slipped past Victoria's arrogance. Something about it made her posture tighten. I'm not sure I understand your meaning, Your Honor. Judge Judy opened a thick folder before her, the movement slow and deliberate. Oh, I think you understand better than you're letting on. But let's continue with your testimony for now. Tell me more about this Persian rug from your family estate in the Cotswolds. Victoria's composure began to show tiny fractures, small, telltale signs that the facade was straining. She rushed back into her story, describing the rug with overflowing, meticulous detail, determined to drown any doubt beneath sheer volume. Your Honor, this particular rug is a 16th-century Persian silk masterpiece, hand-woven by artisans in what is now modern-day Iran. It contains intricate floral motifs and was acquired by my great-great-grandfather during his diplomatic service in the region. It has been authenticated by multiple experts over the years and holds not only considerable monetary value, but also irreplaceable family heritage. She motioned toward her documents with a dramatic flourish, a gesture that now appeared more desperate than authoritative. As shown in the certificates, the current market value is estimated at $15,000. Though truly, such a piece is priceless when one considers its sentimental and historical significance. Judge Judy reviewed the papers with precise attention, and the scrutiny clearly made Victoria uneasy. These certificates look very official. Miss Ashford Williams, tell me what authentication service evaluated this rug. There was the slightest pause before Victoria replied with forced smoothness. The London Antiquities Appraisal Society, Your Honor. They are highly regarded in England for their evaluations of historically significant pieces. Judge Judy placed the documents down, her stare sharp enough to silence the room. The London Antiquities Appraisal Society, she repeated. That's interesting, because my researchers contacted them yesterday. And do you know what they told me? The color drained from Victoria's face, though she attempted to maintain her composure. Her accent grew even more exaggerated as panic seeped in. I'm sure there must be some confusion, Your Honor. Perhaps they operate under multiple offices, or the paperwork references a different organization with a similar name. Judge Judy's expression didn't shift, but the atmosphere in the courtroom tightened instantly. There is no confusion, Miss Ashford Williams. The London Antiquities Appraisal Society does not exist. It never existed. The certificates you've submitted were created on a home computer using clip art and fonts available in Microsoft Word. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Victoria's mouth opened and closed without producing sound, and her carefully maintained accent slipped as unmistakably American vowels leaked out. That's not timing. That's simply not accurate, Your Honor. Perhaps your researchers made an error. Judge Judy leaned forward slightly, her voice acquiring the razor-sharp tone that made her infamous. My researchers don't make errors. Miss Ashford Williams, or should I say, Miss Williams. Vicki Williams, from Toledo, Ohio. The silence that followed was total. Everyone in the room, from the viewers to the staff to Jennifer Lawrence, slack-jawed in disbelief, paralyzed. They were witnessing something extraordinary. Victoria's expression flickered rapidly between confidence, confusion, panic, and frantic calculation. Her accent wavered as she tried to construct a response, the British and American pronunciations tangling together. I don't know what you're referring to, Your Honor. My name is Victoria Ashford Williams, and I can provide documentation of my identity if there's been some kind of administrative mistake. Judge Judy opened her thick folder wider, revealing page after page. Oh, there's no mistake. In fact, let me share what my research team discovered. Her voice now carried the rhythm of someone reading a devastating indictment. Vicki Lynn Williams, born in Toledo, Ohio. High school dropout. No college education of any kind. Certainly no record of attendance at Oxford University. No entry into the United Kingdom according to British immigration. No property in the Cotswolds or anywhere else in England. No family estate. No diplomatic ancestors. No aristocratic lineage whatsoever. Victoria's accent was unraveling as Judge Judy spoke, her fabricated persona collapsing under the weight of each exposed lie. That's private information, and I don't see how it's relevant to the case about the damaged rug. The words came out in a strange, tangled accent, half clinging to her fading British performance, half slipping into unmistakable Ohio vowels. Judge Judy was not finished. Oh, it's extremely relevant. It demonstrates a clear pattern of behavior. Let's continue, shall we? Her voice remained steady as she read from the file. In Phoenix, Arizona. You were going by the name Vivian Beaumont and using a French accent while scamming elderly residents with fake European real estate investments. You left Arizona with outstanding fraud warrants. Gasps spread across the courtroom. A low ripple of disbelief and fascination. In Fort Myers, Florida. You identified yourself as Virginia Bell Ashworth and used an exaggerated Southern accent to operate a charity scam aimed at church groups. You collected over $30,000, claiming it would go to hurricane victims. Not a single dollar reached any charity. Victoria was visibly shaking now, gripping the table as her false identity disintegrated. And in Las Vegas, you operated under the name Veronica West, posing as a Hollywood talent scout. You convinced aspiring actors to pay thousands for services that never existed. Nevada also has outstanding warrants for you. Her fake British accent had completely vanished. What remained was her real voice, a sharp, nasal, Midwestern American tone, betraying every lie she had told. Your Honor, I can explain, she said, desperation rising. Those were misunderstandings. I've changed. I'm not that person anymore. Judge Judy let out a brief, humorless laugh. You're not that person anymore. You are standing in my courtroom right now using a fake British accent, a fake aristocratic identity, fake authentication documents, and a completely fabricated lawsuit to harass an innocent woman because she questioned your stories. You are exactly that person, Miss Williams. You've just switched accents and outfits. Victoria made one last frantic attempt to salvage her collapsing narrative. The accent is real, Your Honor. I've lived in England. I just don't have documentation for all my travel because some of it was private family visits on tourist visas. And the rug is real. It was damaged. And Miss Lawrence's children were responsible, no matter what her so-called evidence says. Judge Judy fixed her with a cold, unblinking stare. Stop. Just stop the performance. I contacted the store where you bought that rug. Home Goods on Riverside Drive. You paid $187.99 for it. She held up a stack of papers. I have the receipt. I have the security footage of your purchase. I have the store manager's statement. Victoria's final defense collapsed entirely when Judge Judy presented photographic evidence of her purchasing the cheap reproduction rug clear security footage showing her pushing a cart through a discount home goods store, her face unmistakable. The last traces of her fake accent disappeared as she sank into her chair, unable to hold up even the illusion of her British persona. Okay. I bought the rug there, she blurted in her natural Midwestern voice. But that doesn't mean it's not valuable. And it doesn't mean Jennifer's kids didn't ruin it. Judge Judy responded instantly, her tone cutting and exact. Miss Williams, her children were never in your house. They were at school and at soccer practice. And you know this? Because you tracked their schedule and planned this entire fraudulent case as retaliation for being questioned about your fabricated identity. You painted fake mud stains on a discount rug with craft store fabric paint. created phony certificates, invented an entirely false timeline, and subjected an innocent family to months of harassment because your ego couldn't tolerate someone asking where you were actually from. Victoria broke down completely, mascara streaking down her cheeks in thick, uneven lines as the weight of her exposure crushed her last bit of composure. "Please, Judge," she sobbed. "I'll drop the case. I'll leave them alone. Just please don't report me to the police. I have nowhere else to go. I need help. I've made mistakes, but I'm trying to change." Judge Judy's face remained unchanged and yielding, resolute. "You're not trying to start over. You are running the same con you've run for 15 years. The only difference is that this time you targeted the wrong person in the wrong courtroom. Your case is dismissed with prejudice. You will pay Miss Lawrence $5,000 to cover her legal fees and for the emotional distress you caused her family. And I'm forwarding all of this documentation to the district attorney's office. I will also be recommending that they contact the authorities in Arizona, Florida, and Nevada regarding your outstanding warrants." Victoria Williams sat shattered in her chair, no longer the elegant British aristocrat she pretended to be, but a broken woman from Toledo whose entire persona had been dismantled piece by piece. Her knockoff blazer, once part of her cultivated sophistication, now looked like a cheap costume from an amateur production. The silk scarf that had seemed so stately earlier now resembled a clearance bin prop. Her smeared makeup made her appear like a melting caricature of her former arrogance. The courtroom remained silent as she attempted one last frantic plea, her real voice brittle with fear. "Judge, please. I have nowhere to go. If you report me, I'll be arrested. I'll lose everything. Can't you just let me drop the case and leave? I swear I'll disappear and never bother anyone again. I just need another chance to put my life together without going to prison." Judge Judy's reply was colder than winter steel, every word delivered with surgical precision. "You've had chances, Miss Williams. You've had many chances in several states over several years. Each time you fled before facing consequences. Each time you started the same scheme somewhere else with a new accent and a new name. You're not asking for a chance to rebuild your life. You're asking for permission to run again, so you can target your next victim in your next city under your next fabricated identity. The answer is no. Miss Lawrence deserves justice. Your previous victims deserve justice, and quite frankly, your future potential victims deserve protection from you." The bailiff had already begun moving toward Victoria's table, recognizing that the ruling was final and that her emotional collapse might require assistance to escort her from the room. Judge Judy shifted her attention to Jennifer Lawrence, who was seated with tears streaming down her face. These were tears of relief, pure, overwhelming relief. "Miss Lawrence," Judge Judy said, her tone softening for the first time, "I want to apologize on behalf of the judicial system that you had to endure months of harassment before receiving justice. You did nothing wrong. You asked a reasonable question about a neighbor's background, and instead of honesty, you were met with a fraudulent lawsuit meant to punish you for noticing the truth," she continued, her voice steady and authoritative. "The $5,000 I'm awarding you will cover your legal consultation fees and compensate you for the sleepless nights and anxiety this con artist inflicted on you and your family." Jennifer managed a trembling "thank you," barely audible but full of gratitude. Judge Judy's expression warmed, slightly just enough to be noticeable. "You protected your children. You kept meticulous documentation. And you had the courage to stand up to someone using a fake persona to intimidate you. That takes real strength." Her gavel struck the bench with unmistakable finality. "Case dismissed. Miss Williams, you are ordered to pay Miss Lawrence $5,000 immediately." You are also barred from filing any further claims in this jurisdiction. And as stated, all evidence is being forwarded to law enforcement authorities. Next case. Victoria was escorted from the courtroom, her sobs echoing down the hallway as she stumbled away in complete disgrace. The woman who had entered with such theatrical confidence and polished pretension now appeared as nothing more than an exposed fraud whose moment of fame would be remembered. For all the worst reasons, the audience silent through Judge Judy's step-by-step dismantling of Victoria's lies burst into spontaneous applause for Jennifer Lawrence. Court staff, who had witnessed countless cases over the years later, remarked that they had never seen such a complete and total unraveling of a con artist, nor such a spectacular collapse of a fake accent on national television. Once the episode aired, the courtroom footage spread rapidly across social media platforms. Within hours, clips appeared on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and everywhere else. Viewers watched in fascination as Victoria Williams's accent and identity disintegrated before their eyes. Within the first day, the video gathered millions of views. Within the first week, tens of millions had watched her facade collapse. The hashtag fake accent trended globally as people shared reactions, created memes comparing her theatrical British persona to her real Ohio voice, and celebrated Judge Judy's methodical exposure of the fraud. British actors and dialect coaches posted reactions, analyzing her inconsistent mix of dialects, misused vocabulary, and the moments when American pronunciations broke through. Linguists wrote analyses about why people adopt false accents to gain credibility. Legal commentators highlighted the case as a textbook example of the importance of verifying claims in civil disputes. The neighborhood where Victoria had lived was thrown into chaos. Neighbors who had believed her aristocratic facade admitted how she had manipulated them, borrowing money she never repaid, claiming transfers were delayed by her British bank, and convincing several families to invest in non-existent opportunities. 2. Neighbors revealed they had given her a combined $8,000 for supposed London real estate ventures that turned out to be pure fiction. Her landlord uncovered that her entire lease application, references, job history, personal details had been fabricated. She was evicted within days. Her belongings moved into storage. The Homeowners Association held an emergency meeting, using Judge Judy's episode as a warning about verifying identities and claims before trusting anyone with money or sensitive information. Criminal investigations accelerated once Judge Judy's evidence reached the authorities. The district attorney filed fraud charges related to her lawsuit against Jennifer Lawrence, along with other local schemes she had been running. Authorities in Arizona, Florida, and Nevada were notified about her outstanding warrants, and a coordinated effort began to locate her victims across multiple states. Within weeks, Victoria Williams was arrested at a bus station while attempting to flee to yet another state under yet another fabricated identity, this time pretending to be an Australian businesswoman with an accent lifted straight from Crocodile Dundee. She was extradited to face charges in several jurisdictions, and prosecutors began assembling cases that would finally hold her accountable for her 15-year pattern of fraud and identity theft. Her public defender attempted to argue that she suffered from mental health issues that explained her conduct, but Judge Judy's meticulous documentation of her calculated planning and deliberate deception made it clear that this is not an issue of instability, was intentional, conscious criminal behavior. Months after her televised exposure, Victoria Williams was convicted of multiple fraud charges across 3 states. She received a cumulative sentence of 8 years in prison, along with restitution requirements for all identified victims. The sentencing judge specifically referenced Judge Judy's episode, noting it as compelling evidence of her calculated dishonesty and total lack of remorse. Victoria's downfall became a landmark case studied in law Schools as an example of how civil proceedings can uncover criminal behavior and how thorough verification can expose complex, long-running frauds. It was incorporated into fraud prevention training for community organizations, demonstrating the tactics con artists use: manufactured personas, fabricated credentials, and borrowed authority to exploit trusting individuals. Jennifer Lawrence's strength in standing up to Victoria, despite the intimidation and false sophistication she faced, became an empowering example for others targeted by neighborhood bullies and scammers who rely on perceived status to avoid scrutiny. The episode secured its place as one of Judge Judy's most watched and widely shared cases. It encapsulated everything that made Judge Judy a cultural icon: her refusal to be impressed by theatrics, her commitment to facts, her protection of innocent people, and her absolute intolerance for those who waste her courtroom's time with elaborate lies. Victoria Williams believed her fake British accent would grant her credibility, elevate her status, and give her an advantage in court. Instead, it became the hallmark of her public unmasking the melodramatic flourish that made her exposure even more unforgettable. The message was unmistakable and resonated with millions. Authenticity triumphs over performance. Truth outlasts deception. And in Judge Judy's courtroom, no accent, no costume, and no amount of theatrical refinement can replace facts, character, or integrity. Victoria Williams learned that lesson in the harshest possible way, leaving behind a cautionary tale. Respect cannot be faked with borrowed identities, and justice is never fooled by accents.